This video is for all of you out there that think that Mr. Gates is a savior and a true good Samaritan. You couldn't be more mistaken. There is so much incriminating evidence about this person out there. You just have to go find it, which is becoming a trickier thing with each passing day. If you don't think the filtering, censoring, removal, and changing of information out there is happening, it is, and it's not slowing down. So I urge you to find your truth while it's still somewhat possible. It's only going to get more confusing after this, the longer you wait. This video is for those with eyes to see and ears to hear. By the end of it, I think it'll be quite obvious who this person is and what his motives are. He would be a horrible poker player, and his little tool sidekick here is just pathetic. But that's what we're faced with this day and age. We're surrounded by these types of people, and they're doing so much more damage than they will ever realize. Also, I just wanted to give you a couple YouTube channels that are putting out really good information. First would be The Highwire with Del Bigtree, great channel. The Corbett Report, The Dollar Vigilante, Truth Stream Media, really graceful, Richie from Boston, and there's others.
And the fact that it's not coughing, where you would kind of notice, hey, I'm coughing. Most respiratory diseases make you cough. This one, in its early stages, it's not coughing, it's singing, laughing, talking, actually still, particularly for the super spreaders, people with very high viral loads, causes that spread. And that's pretty novel. And so even the experts have to say, wow, this caught us by surprise. The amount of asymptomatic spread and the fact that there's not a coughing element is not a major piece like the flu or TB.
All right, watch Bill's face expressions in this next short clip very closely.
Yeah, that is devilish cunning by the virus. I mean, how much is that nonsense?
He acts like he's a proud parent or something when the guy says that about the virus, or so-called virus. It's sick, it's obvious, it's disturbing.
Yeah, that is devilish cunning by the virus. I mean, how much is that nonsense?
I mean, are you kidding me? How obvious. This is a complete psycho. He's ecstatic like a little fucking schoolgirl.
To it.
We're still not able to characterize who the super spreaders are in terms of what that profile is, and we may never. That may just be quite random. If you could identify them, they're responsible for the majority of transmission. A few people, that may just be quite random. If you could identify them, they're responsible for the majority of transmission. A few people who have very high viral loads. But sadly, we haven't figured that out. This mode of transmission, if you're in a room and nobody talks, there's way less transmission. That's partly why, although planes can transmit, it's less than you would expect just in terms of time proximity measures, because unlike, say, a choir or a restaurant, you're not exhaling in loud talking quite as much as in other indoor environments.
What do you think about the ethics of someone who would go on a plane and refuse to wear a mask?
If they own the plane, that would be fine. If there's other people on the plane, that would be endangering those other people.
Early on in the pandemic, the WHO did not advise that people wear masks. They were worried about the WHO did not advise that people wear masks. They were worried about taking them away from frontline medical providers. Was that, in retrospect, was that a terrible mistake that they made?
Yes. All the experts feel bad that the value of masks which ties back somewhat to the asymptomatics. If people were very symptomatic, like an Ebola, then you know it and you isolate. And so you don't have a need for a mask-like thing. The value of masks, the fact that the medical masks was different supply chain than the normal masks.
Look, folks, it's sickening to watch. It is so sickening and infuriating that people are so blind and ignorant. I mean, if you can't tell that this is a big joke to him, that he's flabbergasted by the stupidity of the population, that they're fooling us, getting us to act the way we are, just rolling over without a fight. It is absolutely insulting and unbelievable. What is wrong with people? My 8-year-old child could tell that this man is a liar and mocking us and killing us. And people will line up to get the poison and God knows what else in this vaccine that he's about to make billions of dollars off of and force upon the general public.
Wake up now. Time is, it's beyond time. We were out of time.
So the fact you could scale up the normal mask so well, the fact that it would
Stop that pre-symptomatic, never symptomatic transmission.
it's a mistake. But it's not a conspiracy. It's something that we now know more. And
I mean, it's a mistake. Look at me. You can trust me. I'm not a complete psycho. It's not a conspiracy theory. Are you kidding me, people? It couldn't be more blatant. You gotta share this. You gotta wake up. Or maybe we don't deserve to go on if we're this freaking stupid and ignorant.
It's a mistake, but it's not a conspiracy. It's something that we now know more.
And even now, our error bars on the benefit of masks are higher than we'd like to admit, but it's a significant benefit.
All right, I'm going to come in with some questions from the community. Just pull them up there. Jim Pitofsky, do you think reopening efforts in the US have been premature? And if so, how far should the US go to responsibly confront this pandemic?
Well, the question of how you make trade-offs between the benefits, say, of going to school versus the risk of people getting sick because they go to school, those are very tough questions that, I don't think any single person can say, I will tell you how to make all these trade-offs. The understanding of where you have transmission and the fact that young people do get infected and are part of it, the multi-generational transmission chain, we should get that out. If you just look at the health aspect, we have opened up too liberally. Now, opening up in terms of, mental health and seeking normal health things like vaccines or other care, there are benefits. I think some of our opening up has created more risk than benefit. Opening the bars up as quickly as they did, is that critical for mental health? Maybe not. So I don't think we've been as tasteful about opening up as I'm sure as we study it, that we'll realize some things we shouldn't have opened up as fast. But then you have something like school, where even sitting here today, the exact plan, say for inner city schools for the fall, I wouldn't have a black and white view on the relative trade-offs involved there. There are huge benefits to letting those kids go to school, and how do you weigh the risk. If you're in a city without many cases, I would say, probably the benefit is there. Now that means that you could get surprised. The cases could show up, and then you'd have to change that, which is not easy. But I think around the U.S. there'll be places where that won't be a good trade-off. So almost any dimension of inequity, this disease has made worse. Job type, internet connection, ability of your school to do online learning. White-collar workers, people are embarrassed to admit it, some of them are more productive and, enjoying the flexibility that the at-home thing has created. And, that feels terrible when lots of people are suffering in many ways, including their kids not going to school.
Indeed. Let's have the next question. For us in Rwanda, early policy interventions have made the difference. At this point, what policy interventions do you suggest for the US now? Bill, I dream of the day where you were appointed the coronavirus czar with authority to actually speak to the public, and what would you do?
Well, the innovation tools are where I and the foundation broadly has the most expertise. Clearly some of the policies on opening up have been too generous, but I think everybody could engage in that. We need leadership in terms of admitting that we've still got a huge problem here, and not turning that into almost a political thing of, isn't it brilliant what we did? No, it's not brilliant, but there's many people, including the experts, who didn't. There's a lot they didn't understand, and everybody wishes a week earlier, whatever action they took, they'd taken that a week earlier. The innovation tools, that's where the foundations work on antibodies, vaccines. We have deep expertise, and it's outside of the private sector, and so we have kind of a neutral ability to work with all the governments. I would be coordinating those things, but we need a leader who keeps us up to date, is realistic, and shows us the right behavior, as well as driving the innovation track.
I mean, you have to yourself be a master diplomat in how you talk about this stuff, so I appreciate almost the discomfort here. But, you talk regularly with Anthony Fauci, who's a wise voice on this by most people's opinion. But to what extent is he just hamstrung? He's not allowed to play the full role that he could play in this circumstance.
Dr. Fauci's emerged where he was allowed to have some airtime, and even though he was saying things that are realistic, his prestigious stuff, he could speak out in that way. Typically, the CDC would be the primary voice here. It's not absolutely necessary, but in previous health crises, you let the experts inside the CDC be that voice. They're trained to do these things, and so it is a bit unusual here how much we've had to rely on Fauci as opposed to the CDC. It should be Fauci, who's a brilliant researcher, so experienced, particularly in vaccines. In some ways, he's become taking the broad advice that's the epidemiology advice and explaining it in the right way, where he'll admit, okay, we may have a rebound here, and this is why we need to behave that way. But it's fantastic that his voice has been allowed to come through.
Sometimes. Let's have the next question. Nina Gregory, how are you and your foundation addressing the ethical questions about which countries get the vaccine first, assuming you find one? And maybe, Bill, use this as a moment to just talk about where the quest for the vaccine is, and what are just some of the key things we should all be thinking about as we track the news on this.
There's 3 vaccines that are if they work, are the earliest. The Moderna, which unfortunately won't scale very easily. So if that works, it'll be mostly a U.S. targeted thing. Then you have the AstraZeneca, which comes from Oxford, and the Johnson & Johnson. Those are the three early ones. And we have animal data that it looks potentially good, but not definitive, particularly will it work in the elderly, and we'll have human data over the next several months. Those three will be gated by the safety and efficacy trial. That is, we'll be able to manufacture those, although not as much as we want. We'll be able to manufacture those before the end of the year. Whether the phase 3 will succeed and whether it'll complete before the end of the year, I wouldn't be that optimistic about. Phase 3 is where you need to really look at all the safety profile and efficacy, but those will get started. And then there's 4 or 5 vaccines that use different approaches that are maybe 3 or 4 months behind that. Novavax, Sanofi, Merck. And so we're funding factory capacity for a lot of these. Some complex negotiations are taking place right now on this to get factories that will be dedicated to the countries, the poorer countries. It's called low and middle income.
The poorer countries. It's called low and middle income.
And the very scalable constructs that include AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson will focus on those, the ones that are inexpensive, and you can build a single factory to make 600 million doses. So a number of the vaccine constructs are potential. I don't see anything before the end of the year. That's really the best case, and it's down to a few constructs now, which typically you have high failure rates.
Bill, is it the case that if you and your foundation weren't in the picture here, that the market dynamics would likely lead to a situation where as soon as a promising vaccine candidate emerged, the richer countries would basically gobble up all available initial supply? It just takes a while to manufacture these, and there would be nothing for the poorer countries. But that what effectively you're doing by giving manufacturing guarantees and capability to some of these candidates, you're making it possible that at least some of the early vaccine units will go to poorer countries. Is that correct?
Well, it's not just us, but yes, we're in the central role there, along with the group we created called CEPI, Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness, and the European leaders agree with this. Now, we have the expertise to look at each of the constructs and say, okay, where is there a factory in the world that has capacity that can build that? Which one should we put the early money into? What should the milestones be where we'll shift the money over to a different one? Because the kind of private sector people who really understand that stuff, some of them work for us, and we're a trusted party on these things. We get to coordinate a lot of it, particularly that manufacturing piece. Usually you'd expect the U.S. to think of this as a global problem and be involved. So far, no activity on that front has taken place. I am talking to people in the Congress and the administration about when the next relief bill comes along, that maybe 1% of that could go for the tools to help the entire world. And so it's possible, but it's unfortunate. And the vacuum here, the world is not that used to, and a lot of people are stepping in, including our foundation, to try and have a strategy, including for the poor countries who will suffer a high percentage of the deaths and negative effects, including their health systems being overwhelmed. Most of the deaths will be in developing countries, despite the huge deaths we've seen in Europe and the U.S.
I wish I could be a fly on the wall in hearing you and Melinda talk about this, because of all of the ethical crimes, let's say, executed by leaders who should know better. I mean, it's one thing to, not model mask wearing, but to not play a role in helping the world when faced with a common enemy respond as one humanity, and instead, catalyze a really unseemly scramble between nations to fight for vaccines, for example. That just seems that surely history is going to judge that harshly. That is just sickening, and isn't it? Am I missing something?
Well, it's not quite as black and white as that. The U.S. has put more money out to fund the basic research on these vaccines than any country by far. And that research is not restricted. There's not like some royalty that says, hey, if you take BARDA money, you have to pay the U.S. a royalty. They do, to the degree they fund research, it's for everybody. To the degree they fund factories, it's just for the U.S. The thing that makes this tough is that in every other global health problem. The U.S. totally leads smallpox eradication. The U.S. is totally the leader on polio eradication with, key partners, CDC, WHO, Rotary, UNICEF, our foundation. So the world, and on HIV, what under President Bush's leadership, but it was very bipartisan, this thing called PEPFAR was unbelievable. That has saved tens of millions of lives. And so it's that the world always expected the U.S. to at least be at the head of the table, financially, strategy. Okay, how do you get these factories for the world? Even if it's just to avoid the infection coming back to the U.S. or to have the global economy working, which is good for U.S. jobs, to have demand outside the U.S. And so the world is kind of, there's all this uncertainty about which thing will work, and there's this, okay, who's in charge here? So the worst thing, the withdrawal from WHO, that is a difficulty that hopefully will get remedied at some point, because we need that coordination through WHO.
Let's take another question. Ali Kashani, are there any particularly successful models of handling the pandemic that you have seen around the world?
Well, it's fascinating that besides early action, there are definitely things where you take people who have tested positive and you monitor their pulse ox, which is an oxygen saturation level in their blood, which is a very cheap detector. And then to get them to the hospitals fairly early. Weirdly, patients don't know things are about to get severe. It's interesting physiological reason, but I won't get into. And so Germany has quite a low case fatality rate that they've done through that type of monitoring. And then of course, once you get in facilities, we've learned that the ventilator actually, although extremely well-meaning, was actually overused and used in the wrong mode in those early days. So the doctors are way smarter about treatment today. Most of that, I would say, is global. Using this pulse ox as an early indicator, that'll probably catch on broadly. But Germany was a pioneer there. And now, of course, dexamethasone, fortunately, it's cheap, it's oral, we can ramp up max manufacture. That'll go global as well.
Bill, I want to... Bill, I want to ask you something about what it's been like for you personally through this whole process, because weirdly, even though your passion and good intent on this topic seems completely bloody obvious to anyone who's spent a moment with you, there are these crazy conspiracy theories out there about you. I just checked in with a company called Signal that monitors social media spaces. They say that to date, I think on Facebook alone, more than 4 million posts have taken place that associate you with some kind of conspiracy theory around the virus. I read that there was a poll that more than 40% of Republicans believe that the vaccine that you would roll out would somehow plant a microchip in people to track their location. I mean, I can't even believe that poll number. And then some people are taking this seriously enough, and some of them have even been recirculated a bit on Fox News and so forth. Some people are taking this serious enough to sort of make really quite horrible threats and so forth. You seem to do a good job sort of shrugging this off, but really, I don't, who else has ever been in this position? How are you managing this? What on earth world are we in that this kind of misinformation can be out there? What can we do to help correct it?
I'm not sure. And, it's a new thing. That, there's conspiracy theories. I mean, Microsoft had its share of controversy, but at least that related to the real world. Did Windows crash more than it should? And, we definitely had antitrust problems, but at least I knew what that was. When this emerged, I have to say, my instinct was to joke about it. People have said that's really inappropriate because this is a very serious thing. It is going to make people less willing to take a vaccine. And of course, once we have that vaccine, it'll be like masks, where getting lots of people, particularly when it's a transmission blocking vaccine, there's this huge community benefit to widespread adoption of that vaccine. And so I am caught a little bit unsure what to say or do, because the conspiracy piece is a new thing for me. And, what do you say that doesn't give credence to the thing? The fact that a, Fox News commentator, Lauren Ingram was saying this stuff about me microchipping people, that survey isn't that surprising because that's what they heard. On the TV, it's wild, and people are clearly seeking simpler explanations than going and studying virology.
I mean, Ted is non-political, but we believe in the truth. I would say this, Laura Ingram, you owe Bill Gates an apology and a retraction. You do. And anyone who's watching this, who thinks for a minute that this man is involved in some kind of conspiracy, you want your head examining. You are crazy. Enough of us know Bill over many years and have seen the passion and engagement in this to know that you are crazy. So get over it. And let's look at the actual problem of solving this pandemic, honestly. If anyone on the chat here has a suggestion, a positive suggestion for how do you get rid of conspiracies? Because they feed on each other. Now, I would say that because I'm part of the conspiracy or whatever. Like, how do we get back to a world where information can be trusted? We have to do better on it. Are there any other questions out there from the community? Aria Bendix from New York City. What are your personal recommendations for those who want to reduce their risk of infection amid an uptick in cases?
Well, it's great if you have a job that you can stay at your house and do it through digital meetings, and even some of your social activities. I do video calls with lots of friends. I have friends in Europe that who knows when I'll see them, but we schedule regular calls to talk. It's just if you stay fairly isolated, you don't run much risk. And it's when you're getting together with lots of other people, either through work or socialization, that drives that risk. And particularly in these communities where you have increased cases, even though it's not going to be mandated, hopefully the mobility numbers will show people responding and minimizing those kind of out-of-the-house contacts.
Phil, I wonder if I could just ask you just a little bit about philanthropy. Obviously, your foundation has played a huge role in this, but philanthropy more generally, you've started this Giving Pledge movement, recruited all these billionaires who've pledged to give away half their net worth before or after their death. But it's really hard to do. Like it's really hard to give away that much money. You yourself, I think, since the Giving Pledge was started, 10 years ago or something? I'm not sure when. But your own net worth, I think, has doubled since that period, despite being the world's leading philanthropist. Is it just fundamentally hard to give away money effectively to make the world better?
All right, people, look. To me, it is blatantly obvious, and I don't know how anyone can't see. This dude would make an awful poker player. He's drunk on power and used to never having to worry about concealing much. When you're that wealthy, you just buy people off or kill them off. Anyways, there is countless different sites and sources of information about this guy and how he has his hand in everything. And it's far out there, it's crazy, it's depressing, but it doesn't change the fact that it's real. You need to start researching if you're having a hard time believing what is going on and what this man is behind. I'm sure he answers to greater powers. I'm pretty positive about that, but regardless, he's definitely a cog in the immediate wheel that needs to be addressed. And it just appalls me that people are so asleep or ignorant or distracted or whatever it is that they can't see it and aren't in an outrage on top of all the other bullshit that keeps passing or happening each passing day. We got to do something. We got to unite. We got to wake up. We got to share information. We got to educate ourselves. But we also need to actually do something. Well, I'll leave it at that. For those with eyes to see and ears to hear, it's pretty freaking obvious, I'd say. I wish you well. Best of luck.
Well, Bill, I'm in